pick up where my colleague Kelvin Davis left off, because we have on this side of the House been making the point throughout this debate that we've got a great deal of concern about the ability of the Minister, in this case Murray McCully, in consultation with Jerry Brownlee and Nick Smith, their ability to override the decisions of the authority. On this side of the House, we've been quite comfortable with the idea of the authority existing and being there for where there needs to be urgent approvals, but setting up a process where the authority's decisions can be ignored by the Minister is one that we believe is dangerous, and in particular in relation, Mr Chair, to Part 5, because this is, for instance, as my colleague Kelvin Davis was just mentioning, Clause 77 here says variation, suspension or cancellation of licence. All of those things fall into the authority's ability to actually look after, and therefore in turn put in place a situation where the Minister could be able to undermine a decision of the authority around a liquor licence. And I think that is a great example of why we're concerned about the undermining of the Rugby World Cup Authority's powers by giving the Minister effectively the right of veto. And so Clause 77 actually is quite interesting because effectively it allows an inspector or a constable of the police at any time to apply to the authority for an order to vary or revoke a condition of a Rugby World Cup licence or impose a new condition. Now that's obviously something someone would only do if they were seriously concerned about a licence, and yet the authority's power to consider that is automatically undermined by giving the Minister the ability to veto what they say. So on this side of the House we think that this Part 5 includes a number of examples of where we think that the clause that unfortunately was passed in Part 4 of this bill, allowing the Minister to veto things, is wrong. I do want to actually say to the Select Committee that I think they've made some good changes in Part 5 around liquor licences. I think there's been some clarifications here that may ensure, for instance, that we now know that these licences are limited very much to the time of the Rugby World Cup, and that's important. It also puts in place the ability to clarify that suspending a sale of liquor a licence will just be for the duration of a Rugby World Cup licence. A new clause inserted to provide the authority the ability to grant licences concurrently, so that we know that all of the venues will be operating under similar arrangements. And I think that's important. And I would draw the distinction here between the Rugby World Cup arrangements and what happened on Saturday night at Eden Park. The Rugby World Cup is a bigger and greater event. It is going to be one where there will be people moving from ground to ground, visitors from overseas. They'll be getting used to consistent conditions, and I think it's unlikely that we're going to see a repeat of what happened at Eden Park. But that doesn't mean that we shouldn't set in place cautious measures, because we do need to do that to protect our reputation. And I do return, Mr Chair, to the question of whether or not a legacy investment from the Rugby World Cup in the form of wet pour facilities at Eden Park is justifiable. And I think we did see on Saturday night the dangers of, in a situation like what we had there, alcohol being sold in bottles or cans. And we do know from papers that have previously been discussed during this debate that the police recommended that wet pour facilities be provided at Eden Park, and that the Rugby World Cup Limited and the government have opposed that. And I think the police really are reflecting the health and safety concerns that we saw at Eden Park on Saturday. That the wet pour facilities, meaning that beer is provided in cups, reduces the danger from the kind of missiles and projectiles that bottles can become. Now, wet pour facilities are quite slow, and Kelvin Davis has just mentioned this, that if people have to go up and take cups of beer away, that is much slower than carrying bottles and cans. But that has to be balanced, Mr Chair, against the safety concerns that the police have been raising here. And I think what we've seen from a number of residents around Eden Park and people who attended the game, that actually there should be serious consideration given to the installation of wet pour facilities at Eden Park. Jerry Brownlee dismissed those things when the police came to him 3 times to ask him to reconsider that, and I think now the government does need to seriously reconsider whether or not a legacy investment is possible for Eden Park, a facility that no doubt in the future will be used for major events, and it needs to be able to provide a safe environment for everybody who goes there. So while, Mr Chair, there are some things in this part that I think are good and useful, I do think the government needs to consider its options for the future around Eden Park and how it serves alcohol.
I call